we're going to do this Zelda tier list. This is every Zelda game, including the spin-offs. I do not believe it has the CDI games, which are fair. I don't think they're considered official Zelda games at this point in time. Though the CDI games, anyways, would go into the haven't played tier, because I haven't played them. Let me turn the camera a little. I should have probably had it turned earlier, but that's fine. So, we'll start with... Well, it looks like we're starting with Tingle's Rosy Ruby Land. Now, I actually played this. I think most people and most fans in the US have not played this because Tingle's Rosy Ruby Land never released in the US. It released in Japan and in Europe. And it was a DS game. I imported it on the DS through like Amazon or something. I bought a copy, a European copy, because the DS was not region locked. And yeah. So I did play it. Tingle's Rosy Ruby Land is a spin-off starring Tingle and centering around him trying to collect lots of money. I mean, I forget a lot of the details of the plot. It was a plot. I remember the gameplay. There's some puzzles and there's combat, but you don't do the combat. You have to use money to hire bodyguards to fight for you, and they fight in a cartoon smoke cloud and either win or lose depending on strength. And you not only do you not participate, you barely get to watch. You see a smoke cloud happen and then it's done. So the combat is pretty much non-existent. The puzzles are kind of Yep, inheritance. Pinkle is in it. Pinkle is a pink Tingle, a girl, but she's kind of dressed in like, I think it was like a bikini like outfit that's pink, and she's one of the ones like assigned to try to buy some like fairy or something, the fairy of money or something dumb like that, to like work with Tingle to get Tingle to like earn all this money. But if you 100% the game, which I did this for all of you guys so you wouldn't have to. I 100%ed Tingle's Rosy Ruby Land. It was painful. It was long. It was grindy. I do not recommend it. I don't recommend playing this game. But if for some reason you want to play this game, I really don't recommend you do 100%. But if you do 100%, you get a hologram of Pinkle for Tingle's room. I don't know why he wants a hologram of Pinkle in his room. I don't want to know. As I implied, though, this game is not very good. It might, in fact, be the only game that I end up putting in F tier. And I'm sorry. I went into this game trying every bit of me just to love it, because I've not made it that much of a secret. Tingle is like possibly my favorite Zelda character. Period. I love Tingle. So I got this full hope that there'd at least be some fun there. This had zero fun. Bearing letting all character Chino stats of Pinkle, who's bizarrely properly proportioned. True. Or chibi style. Yeah, true. She is, but it's for the sex appeal. I'll be honest. I'll just be blunt there. It's creepy, but that is clearly what they're going for. But Tingle's Ruby Land, I tried so hard to love something about it. Something. I can't even love the fact that Tingle got his own game because it's such a bad game. And as we'll talk about shortly, Tingle went on to get 2 other games. So it's not even like this was Tingle's only chance at having a game. It's just awful. Do not get Tingle's Rosy Ruby Land for your sanity. And if you must, don't 100% it. Well, now this looks like... Is this, what Zelda game is this? What Zelda game is this? I can't see what Zelda game that is. Hold on, this is gonna really mess up while I zoom in. If it lets me. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong button. I'm just zooming in. I'll fix it in a second. God, I still can't tell. What Zelda game is this? Oh, we do have the CDI games here. We do have the CDI games here. Oops. Okay. Did I fix it? Oops. Let me a little higher. Is that good? In fact, it could be still a little higher. Let's make it a little higher. Yeah, that's good for now. So, I guess we do have the CDI titles here, because this is the Link the Faces of Evil. I haven't played the CDI games, so I had to put it there. I have a bad reputation, but I can't honestly give them a tier if I haven't played them. And now, the next one is, good, which one was this? This one is Ripen Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love. This is one of the other, Tingle games. And I think it actually was received a little better. But it was never released outside of Japan. From my understanding, it's essentially a visual novel that's kind of like a ripoff of The Wizard of Oz. Which is silly. I really wish I could have played this. I mean, I could someday. I don't know if it has a fan translation. But it never got localized, so I have to put it in the never played. It honestly sounds better than Rosie Rupee Land, at least. Okay, but next, I don't know what order they're going in here, but the next is Link Between Worlds. And Link Between Worlds, it was a 3DS game that uses the same overworld as Link to the Past. They kind of went for the nostalgia pull. And it stars, or it has a new area called Lorule, which is like an alternate Hyrule. But their Triforce is destroyed, and so they're kind of in ruin. And it has the novel thing about it, the main thing is it has an item rental system. Rather than going and get your items in a set order and using them to go through dungeons in a set order, you can use rubies to rent or buy items, any item you want, out of the numerous choices at the shop. And that item will let you get to and through a certain dungeon, so you can do the dungeons in any order, which is a cool concept. It also had a weird portrait mechanic where you can go 2D in the walls and certain parts, and that was kind of cool. Okay, Link Between Worlds is really loved, and I understand why. There's a lot of nostalgia they went for Link to the Past. I didn't have as much nostalgia for Link to the Past. I played it when I was younger, but I didn't play it a lot, and I didn't really... I think when I got it, it was like at the end of the Super Nintendo life. Like, I just got it to get it. I didn't even play through it until much later. Like, I never beat it until much later. And so, like, couldn't really get me on the nostalgia. I like the idea of the item rental system, kind of. But then I end up feeling like I'm money grinding for stuff. And then I feel like I can just get all the items right off the bat is my issue. And, like, especially if I just want to grind. I don't know. I think that it has a good concept that I'd like to be fleshed out a little differently in the future. Overall, though, it was still a fun game, and I love the addition of Lorule, of Princess Hilda, I believe was her name, and of who was alternate? Ravio. Ravio was alternate Link. The villain's kind of interesting too. It is Link Between Worlds, probably a B tier. Yeah, I think it'd be about B tier. Now Link to the Past plus Four Swords, which has to be rated differently than OG Link to the Past. I'm gonna actually rate OG Link to the Past first. Link to the Past was the Super Nintendo Zelda game, and really, in a lot of ways, the originator of the 2D Zelda line. Like, we had Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 before then. We'll get into those, but Zelda 2 is very different, and Zelda 1 still has a very different feel than Link to the Past, and does a lot of things still kind of different due to simpler hardware. Link to the Past was the first one that really had like a heavy plot with like twists in it. It was the first one to have an alternate world, which became a theming of a lot of Zelda games, to have some sort of like alternate world at some point in the game where it turns out you're all like, there's essentially acts. You got through Act 1 and then find out, oh wait, there's an Act 2. In this, it was the Dark World. You get through the three main palaces and you unlock, you end up going to what you think is the final boss. And nope, you're not even halfway through the game. Like I said, I don't have a ton of nostalgia for it, but Link to the Past is a very solid game. You don't have to have any nostalgia for it if you just play it. As long as you like that type of game, you should enjoy Link to the Past. It's very well polished, very well paced. It's kind of linear, but not super linear. Like, it's one of the less linear Zeldas. It's an A tier Zelda for me. It's not one of my favorites, and in fact, I respect it more than I like it even. Like, it's not it's a Zelda game that I praise in that it's a great game. It's not a Zelda game that I praise for subjective reasons. Subjectively, it'd probably be closer to a B for me. But I just acknowledge it's just such a great such a great title. Sorry, I need to get some water. That I think it's an A tier game. Okay, so now we'll do Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, and Four Swords. Link to the Past, like every Zelda games have constantly been getting remakes and ports and stuff. And so Link to the Past is no stranger. On the Game Boy Advance, they end up deciding, hey, why don't we make some quick money before we make an original Zelda for a handheld here. I mean, they had original before then, but before we make a Game Boy Advance Zelda, why don't we cash out with our already existing popular Link to the Past, but now on portable format? And that alone would have been reason for most people to buy it a second time. Like, it even manages, Game Boy Advance, it not only manages to meet how well the game was presented, it manages to, I think, outperform it in some ways. So that alone would have made it already a great package. But they didn't stop there, because Game Boy Advance was it wasn't the first Game Boy with linking capabilities, but the link cable from the previous Game Boy was limited. You could do multiplayer with it, but generally there wasn't a lot to the package, and you could only link two people together. Game Boy Advance, they really started to lean harder into the multiplayer side of it, and they even had, if I remember correctly, only one person needed to own it. Everybody else just needed a Game Boy Advance, and you can use link cables to connect up to 4 players. So they decided they wanted to throw in a little something extra, multiplayer mode, and that was Four Swords. This was the first multiplayer Zelda, and it wasn't very long, which is fair because they put it in probably knowing that most people wouldn't get to fully experience it unless they had friends who also had Game Boy Advances and they had the link cables and stuff. So, like, it wasn't the reason to buy the game, it was a bonus. So that's why they probably made it a little shorter than a full game. But for what it was really fun, really chaotic. It went on to inspire more multiplayer Zeldas. So that alone is a good reason. Like, it already, like I said, Link to the Past on Game Boy Advance already was a great deal for people. It was, I don't know, somewhere between 30 and 40 bucks for a Game Boy Advance game. And that was really nice for portable Link to the Past. But then you got Four Swords, which is a fun little bonus. And it's worth saying that Four Swords introduced Vati, a new villain, that would reappear a couple more times. It was great having a villain that wasn't Ganondorf. We had a couple before, but usually it just ends up being really Ganondorf in the end. But Vati was legitimately its own villain. Overall, I mean, I can't rate it lower than Link to the Past. So, but it's still not an S tier game for me, but it is high A tier, while I would say rather regular Link to the Past is mid A tier. It manages to slightly outdo an already amazing game. I shouldn't even say slightly. Like, that's a solid, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a solid half point more at least. I wish I could give it more, but it's already a really high ranking game. If I had A+, it would be A+. Then, of course, we have Breath of the Wild. I really don't know why the order of this list is the way it is, but I'm just going to go with it. Breath of the Wild is kind of the newest mainline game, Zelda game we've had so far. Breath of the Wild came out at the launch of the Switch, as well. It was also on Wii U. It was originally going to be a Wii U game, and they decided to make it multi-platform after it was delayed anyways, and put it on Switch. So Breath of the Wild really is a Wii U game that's also on Switch. It takes advantage of the Switch capabilities just fine, and I wouldn't say either version is less good. In fact, the Switch version probably a little better because you're playing on better hardware. But both are really great. The thing I want to note about it is most people separate Zelda into 2D Zeldas and 3D Zeldas because they play so very differently. And I think Breath of the Wild does not fit into the category of 3D Zelda. I don't think it fits into either category. I think Breath of the Wild is the start of its own category of open world Zeldas, which we may have more of. Breath of the Wild 2 is coming. That'll probably be like that. I don't think it's comparable, and it's not similar in formula to other 3D Zeldas. It's a lot more focused on exploration, a lot less dungeon focused, a lot less item focused. It has a full physics engine. It's just very different. And here comes the hard part that I might get some heat for. Because of its differences, it's not an S-rank Zelda for me. And I usually, it's not that I don't like differences. It just lacks the things that I love most about Zeldas. Like, my favorite things about Zelda are probably the dungeons, the items, and the bosses. The dungeons of Breath of the Wild are very basic. They're glorified puzzle rooms. Unless you count the shrines, which are kind of like mini dungeons too, but they're even less smaller glorified puzzle rooms. And they all have very similar aesthetics, which if I was doing a tier list of Zelda dungeons, maybe I'll do that someday. Aesthetics is a huge part of my enjoyment of a dungeon. Like, one of my favorite dungeons is probably Snow Peak from Twilight Princess, because it's a Yeti's mansion. It's just so interesting to me. Twilight Princess had a lot of dungeons that are some of my favorites, but Skyward Sword had some too, like Ancient Cistern, which is so cool, the design of it. So that's the first thing. It lacks any real unique dungeons. The second thing, items. You get some cool gadgets when you're on the Great Plateau, but once you get off of there, you kind of have what you have for the rest of the game. You, aside from your sword and shield, you have your magnet app, your freezing app, your other freezing app, like one's ice freezing, one's like stops things from moving, and you have a few apps, but you don't really get more items to work with in the game. And that's one of my favorite things in Zelda games, is stumbling on a new item and like just being able to play around with new items and even old items. And then the third thing, bosses. The major bosses of the game, the blights, all feel very samey to me. They each have their own unique models, attacks, quirks. The arenas are different. But in the end, they all just feel like elemental ghosty Ganon. And to me, that's like having different variations of Phantom Ganon for every boss in a game. It doesn't feel super exciting to me. It was just kind of going through the motions. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot I loved about Breath of the Wild. I don't want people to be coming after me being like, oh my goodness, Shad hates Breath of the Wild. No. Breath of the Wild is a 10 out of 10 game, and I think it's an amazing game. I just don't think, for me, it's an amazing Zelda game. It is a game that you could have not had any Zelda stuff in it, and I would have loved it just the same. And if there was no Zelda stuff in it, I would have never mentally thought this is Zelda. It's a game, and it's a game where I'd sometimes spend hours trying to find something and not be super engaged, but then find something really cool and spend the next 10-15 minutes dealing with something really cool or really fun. And just because of all that, it's an A-rank Zelda for me. In fact, it's actually still below the Link to the Past games to me. I don't know if I'll ever replay Breath of the Wild. It was such a long experience, and any of the joy I got out of it was from discovering stuff for the first time. I am absolutely looking forward to Breath of the Wild 2, because I'm going to be discovering stuff for the first time again, as well as I have the hope that we will have some traditional dungeons in there, some new items in there, and maybe some cool bosses. I forgot to mention, there are some overworld bosses that are kind of cool. There's my favorite thing, actually, there's one dragon thing that's you fight in the air. It's really cool. It's a bladed dragon. But there's also like some giants, some rock monsters. There's some the Lionels, the horse things. There's some cool stuff, but like it's maybe an A minus for me. It's low A. It's a game, and that's as a Zelda game. I'd put it S rank if I was doing a tier list of Switch games. I'd be putting it in S tier. Because I'm doing a tier list of Zelda games, I'm putting it in A tier. Just because, once again, it's not what I love Zelda for, despite it having stuff that I love. Hopefully that makes sense enough that people are gonna get all up in arms about that. Well, Link's crossbow training. People meme on this and hate this a lot, Link's crossbow training, and it's another game that's not what I look to for a Zelda game, which means obviously I'm not going to give it an S rank. I'm not even going to necessarily give it an A rank. But I do feel like it's an underrated game. It's not a full game either. It came out on the Wii for the Wii got a Wii Zapper, a little plastic shell for the Wii remote to use in light gun games, and only used it for like a handful of games really. But it had the accessory had a pack in that was Link's crossbow training, and it was in the Twilight Princess style, basically like like a light gun game. It was like an on-rails arcade style shooter where you hit targets to get high scores. It kind of reminds me of, if you've ever been to Disney World, they have a Toy Story Mania. It's like probably my favorite ride at Disney, or one of my favorites. You go around, ride around on this moving seat and stop in front of screens, 3D screens, and shoot at targets and try to get the highest score out of you and your friends. And it's kind of like that to me. It's just you're moving around the Twilight Princess world, shooting stuff, trying to get high scores. I had a lot of fun with it. I don't think it deserves hate. I'd love if somehow we could ever get a Link's crossbow training again. I don't think we ever will. But I think it'd be a fun little eShop game for like 10, maybe 20 max. And especially with like online, or like friends leaderboards and stuff. Online leaderboards too, I guess. But I'm not as excited about those as just a leaderboard with my friends. Overall, it is a B tier Zelda for me. People are going to be like, wow, that's high for a crossbow training. But every time I played crossbow training, I had fun. I consistently had fun with that game. Now, Four Swords Adventures. So we already talked about Four Swords, and Four Swords was a pretty popular concept when it came out. So it's not a surprise that on the GameCube, they decided to make a full game that was Four Swords. It used Game Boy Advances as controllers with the adapter to connect it, so still had the same problem for multiplayer. If everybody needs a Game Boy Advance and you don't need enough adapters. Single player, you could do it without a Game Boy Advance. And single player is not the best way to play the game, trust me. It's really meant as a multiplayer game. But it's more or less Zelda length. And it's not like a big world, it's stages. You just go through stage by stage, but it's still really fun. As long as you can jump through all the hoops to be able to play it. And in fact, this is hard. Where do I want to place it? It's probably an A rank Zelda for me. I'm just trying to decide where in the A ranks I'm placing it. I'm gonna so much reactions for how I'm placing this. There's games that are above Breath of the Wild, but I'm sorry. I love Breath of the Wild. It's an A tier game. But if I had the opportunity to replay a Zelda game, or if I was going to take the time to replay a Zelda game in the near future, I'd really love to replay Four Swords Adventures with people. Breath of the Wild, I don't think I'll ever replay. I'll play the sequel, and I'll love the sequel, but it's a one and done style game for me. Okay, we have all the Hyrule Warriors games next. Hyrule Warriors is, there's a completely different game series. There's game series Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors, the Musou games. A style of action game, kind of hack and slash game that's heavily strategy or focused, that usually were based on historical time periods and people and stuff. And it'd be big battlefields where you're capturing points of the field and fighting through hordes and hordes of enemies that you can take down in 1 or 2 attacks each. And it's a complete style of game. And there's been a bunch of spin-off crossover Musou games that they do with all different other games. Hyrule Warriors was an early example of one of these because they've become very popular recently. We've had a lot of them. Hyrule Warriors was on the Wii U, and it was, like I said, a Zelda Warriors game. Had a huge cast of characters. It involved a crazy time travel plot that's considered non-canon, though I'm not sure. I could have a whole discussion on what canon even means in Zelda. But it's it had some great original characters, which is rare. Most Musou games I played, the OCs are not that interesting to me. It has some really fun ones, but also had just a huge, great cast of characters from Zelda games that you can finally play as. The gameplay is fun. It does not feel like a Zelda game. It's very grindy. It has a lot of content, hundreds of hours of content, and it got DLC to just give it even more and more content. Once again, I don't feel right putting it in the top couple ranks because it's not really a Zelda game. It's only a name. It's a spin-off. But it is probably a B rank Zelda for me. I'd probably put it right about there. I enjoy it. It's a game I might go back to at some, well, not that version, but which we'll get to in a minute. But it's a type of game I wouldn't mind playing more. Like, I never 100%ed the game, and it has fun co-op too. That's always a nice plus, 2-player co-op. But then we get into Hyrule Warriors. What is it? Hyrule Warriors Legends, I think it's called. Basically, Hyrule Warriors was really popular, and you know what else was really popular? Not the Wii U. The Wii U was not really popular. The 3DS, though. The 3DS was popular. And so, Koei Tecmo and Nintendo are like, hey, maybe we should take this popular game and put it on a popular system, and then more people would play it. And this was a great idea on paper, and it had even new content. It had Wind Waker content, which wasn't in the original. Some new characters, a little new story, some new content. Great idea. So the problem is, Hyrule Warriors probably pushed the Wii U to its limits in terms of hardware. And the Wii U, while not super powerful, it was probably more powerful than the 3DS. So it was kind of hard to fit on 3DS. Nintendo released the new 3DS around that time, which was a kind of 3DS Pro, had slightly higher capabilities. It didn't really have much in terms of exclusive games. It had a few. Hyrule Warriors Legends was not exclusive, but they recommended it. And when I say recommended, if you played it on an old 3DS, good luck. You're in a lag fest of poor performance, just nothing, like, it's awful. If you played it on a new 3DS, good luck, but you don't need as much luck. But you still, I played it on the new 3DS. That's what I had. And one of the problems with it on the new 3DS was it still couldn't handle as many models on screen as the Wii U version. And so a lot of times enemies would struggle, the game would be struggling to spawn enough enemies on a screen. And you'd notice this problem for a lot of the missions. To get S rank, you need to get like 1,500 KOs, or 1,200 KOs in 15 minutes or something. And the game would just struggle to make enough enemies on screen in the time limit to get S rank. It had a cool little additional feature with fairies that you could raise and stuff. But ultimately, it's an inferior version of Hyrule Warriors despite having more content because of performance issues. In fact, with how many performance issues it had, and the fact that it pretty much needed new 3DS, and still struggled, it's D rank for me, which is a shame. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having the game on the go, but it is what it is. It had a lot of performance issues. That brings us to Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. Yes, the same game got released not 2, but 3 times. Because Nintendo was like, hey, this game's popular. We released it on a system that wasn't popular, and a system that was popular that couldn't handle it. What if we release it on a system that is popular and can handle it? And that was Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. Thank goodness all of the new content added in Legends was not forever stuck on a system where you can't properly enjoy it. They brought that all over to Definitive Edition along with a little more content. But it had everything. It had everything in all the games. Hundreds, if not 1,000 hours, depending on how efficient you are. At the very least, hundreds of hours of gameplay. And it's what more could you ask for Hyrule Warriors? It ran great too because it's on Switch and Switch ran fine. Switch runs fine. That being said, I'd put it about here. I think Breath of the Wild is a better game. I enjoyed Breath of the Wild more. It's probably barely into A rank. It might be the lowest A rank I'll give, but it's an A rank. Though your mileage with it will depend on how much you end up enjoying Musou games. That's just the fact of the matter. So we'll skip this one first to go for this one right after it. Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. The first handheld Zelda game on the original Game Boy, the old gray brick. Link's Awakening was, like I said, it was the first handheld Zelda. It was not the, it kind of started a series of the handheld Zeldas, of how the handheld Zeldas would be in a lot of ways. Overall, it's fairly beloved. It's a very, very solid game. It's probably one of the best games on the original Game Boy. Like, I would argue hard that it is one of the best. And overall, I think it's probably an A-rank game. About there. And speaking of Link's Awakening, Game Boy Color came out, which was like kind of the next Game Boy. Did it have any exclusives that actually were exclusive to it? Because I think a lot of Game Boy Color games you could play on Game Boy. No, I think it had exclusives, but it was mainly just, as it implies, a Game Boy that also had color. And games that didn't natively, Game Boy games that didn't natively have color, it could kind of stick color into them a bit. They look better than on the old Game Boy screen. But some of the more popular Game Boy games got remakes, DX remakes, deluxe editions, that were meant to take advantage of the color capabilities of it, as well as kind of try to remarket the games again. And Link's Awakening was chosen for that. And not only did it get color added to it, it got a whole new dungeon called the Color Dungeon that uses the color for puzzles. If you're colorblind, I get too bad. I'm sorry. Like, I'm not saying that's a good choice. Like, really, accessibility is super important. So, like, I would never give this game the Color Dungeon concept a perfect score. Yeah, sure, this game. Because of that, because it's not colorblind friendly, but it is an optional dungeon. Overall, though, it kind of was an improvement to Link's Awakening. It's still the same game. It's a very slight improvement. It's like a 0.1 better. So, I'll put it there. It's fun. But wait, there's more. On the Nintendo Switch, for whatever reason, Nintendo decided, you know what? Needs a new remake? Link's Awakening. Let's make it in 3D with a toy aesthetic. I have no idea why they chose any of that. But it's not a bad game. I do think it was a bit much to have that game as a $60 game. It's an original Game Boy game, which means it's not super long. It it looks nice for what it is. It really should have been like 40 at most. But that being said, it has the color dungeon is back. And I think it actually uses symbols and stuff in the puzzles so that they're not just color, which is colorblind friendly, so thank you. But it doesn't add enough to make it really stick out any further ahead of the other Link's Awakening versions, other than it's just right above them. Still, it's a solid package. If you can find it on a deal, I'd recommend getting it. It's a fun game. It was a little disappointing to me at the time that was what got a remake, because at the time, the only Zelda games on Switch were Breath of the Wild, which I established to me didn't feel much like a Zelda game. Hyrule Warriors, which Definitive Edition, which definitely isn't like a real Zelda game. And I think we had Nintendo and Super Nintendo by then, Virtual Console, meaning Zelda, Zelda 2, and Link to the Past. So, like, I was really wanting a traditional 3D Zelda on the system, and this is what we got first. And I was a little disappointed, but it's a great game, and I won't fault it for just the timing of it, me wanting a 3D Zelda. Okay, and now we have Majora's Mask, the game we just did a randomizer of that I've never made it a secret that it's my favorite game of all time. Majora's Mask. We're going to start with the original Majora's Mask on the Nintendo 64. What can I say? It's my favorite Zelda game. It was the second 3D Zelda game after hot on the heels of Ocarina of Time. I believe Miyamoto basically said to Aonuma, hey, do you think you can make another Zelda game in like a year? And he was like, watch me. And so they used a bunch of assets from Ocarina of Time. They have some new assets, but they used a ton of assets from Ocarina of Time to make this very, very indie style Majora's Mask. Very different. Nothing like the series has been, nothing like any game that had been up to that point. And I'm not sure if we've had any other game quite like it. It is, like, I don't know how much summary I need to give because guys just watch you play a randomizer of it, but it's like has a cool timing loop thing, which makes it so every NPC can have a set schedule of things they do, and every character has their own individual story going on, and you can learn about them. You can talk to them at different times to learn what's going on and in their stories. Talk to other NPCs to learn what's going on in those little stories, and it makes the whole world feel like a world. It doesn't feel like something that revolves around Link with a bunch of characters just kind of hanging out waiting for Link to talk to them. Like, everybody's busy, they're doing stuff. If you want to talk to them, you have to go talk to them, interrupt them, and be like, hey, what are you doing, what's up? Also, it didn't have Ganondorf or Ganon. That was a plus to me. It had a unique villain. I wish they'd bring Majora back. Had a lot of cool mysterious stuff like Fierce Deity. It had a lot of dark stuff, which, like, darker than they've ever gotten in the entire series. And the time mechanic not everybody likes. I understand it puts a lot of pressure on some people. Yeah, I get it. I understand why it might be a lot of pressure. I'm very comfortable with it, so I don't ever feel the pressure. I know where stuff happens and when, and if I mess up, oh well, I can just reset the loop. But overall, like, it does so much unique. It feels like the world's more alive than other Zelda games, and like, it has this whole crazy apocalyptic event going on while people are split between freaking out and trying to pretend it's not there, which might be a little too real for some people. It's an S-rank game for me. and I won't lie, a good portion of that is probably subjective. It probably, for most people, this would not be S rank. There's probably a few people like me that see the things great about it and feel those are some of the most valuable things in a Zelda game. But I acknowledge that for most people, it's probably not, and the difficulties of the game, the things that make it hard to get into, for a lot of people might not outweigh the enjoyment they get. And I acknowledge that. Then along comes Majora's Mask 3D on the 3DS. You can bet when this was announced, I was stoked. I was so excited. Majora's Mask 3D. I had been waiting my whole life, pretty much, for a remake of that game. Like, back when I was a small child, Majora's Mask was the first game I ever pre-ordered. First game I read everything I could before it came out. I got the strategy guide. I was obsessed with Majora's Mask. But then, all those years, and sure, Majora's Mask got included in some of the Zelda collections on the GameCube and the Virtual Console. But it was never really acknowledged much because of the mixed reception. And so I kind of had just accepted, hey there, Silver. Yeah, we beat the rando. We're in our tier list. Welcome. It was the same Majora's Mask 3D. I accepted that we would never get a Majora's Mask remake of any kind. It didn't seem likely. So you can bet when they announced Majora's Mask 3D, I lost my mind. And they announced they were doing a limited edition Majora's Mask 3DS, which I absolutely jumped through hoops trying to get. I missed the initial pre-orders because scalpers, and there was quite a few nights that I was up to like 4 a.m. refreshing websites trying to see if there'd be a restock. I was determined to get that 3DS. I got it. I love it. Ever need a copy of Link the Faces of Evil Remastered to cook me up? Sure, I might take you up on that offer sometime. As you can see, I haven't played. Majora's Mask 3D, when it came out, I wish I could say that I loved it. At first I told myself I loved it because it was a remake of Majora's Mask, which I never thought we got. Plus, it was handheld, so I could play it anywhere. But the more I looked at it, the harder it was for me to ignore a lot of things I didn't like changed about it. It had some things that were great that were changed. It had gyro, which was the best change it could have. And it had some changes to the time travel mechanic and the saving mechanic, which I didn't care about personally because I was so comfortable with the game the way it is, but it didn't hurt the experience for me and it helped others. And it added fishing, which I'm not a big fan of fishing minigames, I'm sorry. So I actually didn't even touch the fishing in Majora's Mask 3D. I was just like, I don't want to tarnish my favorite game with a minigame that I'm not going to enjoy. But it also just changed a lot of minor things. It changed how the Zora swam, and the Zora swam worse. It changed how Goron rolled, so you couldn't even get full speed if you didn't have magic, rather than go at full speed just without spikes. It changed how I can think of everything. It changed Georg, which needed changing, sure, but I didn't love that it changed so you use, I think you use the fishing pole. It changed Twin Mold, which needed changing, sure, but it made it worse. Twin Mold's problem was it was kind of too easy of a battle in the original. That was just a Giant's Mask gimmick and a race against your magic meter, kind of. You get the infinite magic thing though, and then you're fine. It was not that interesting, but then this changed it and they made it so now when you're giant you can't use a sword. I guess the logic is the mask doesn't make your sword grow, so why would you be able to use your sword? But I mean, it makes your clothes grow, so why not? And you had to like grapple it, and the grappling was so frustrating to me. I spent so long frustratingly trying to just beat that boss before that 3-day cycle ended because it was so janky. I hated it. And then the worst changes to all the bosses, that they added these weird bulging eyes that were just like stereotypical. Aim for the eye, it's the weak point. And the bosses didn't need these eyes. They added nothing to the game. And there was even just small changes that I didn't like. Big eye bosses. Oh god, I hated that. There's a small changes I didn't like Stone Tower Temple. They changed the motifs. It had like the original had giants licking the Triforce and stuff like that because it was supposed to be a tower of sin built in defiance of the goddesses, and like it was folly of man. Big middle finger to the goddesses. We don't care about your Triforce. They changed that. Licking the Triforce, I guess, was too lewd. And they changed Tattle. They changed my favorite partner of the entire franchise. This little sarcastic piece of crap that follows you around and treats you awful, but has a character arc and learns by the end. And I love her. And she was like the precursor to Midna, the partner that's working with you because she has to and will treat you awful until she learns a heart. But they changed her in Majora's Mask so she wasn't as sarcastic or mean. Before, you would target an enemy and she would be like, "You don't know what a Deku Baba is? How do you not know that?" Now she's just like, "Yeah, that's a Deku Baba." I was like, why? Why are you cutting out her sass? Do you think this little glowing ball with wings is going to hurt 8-year-old Timmy's feelings? Yeah, I could just go on so much on all the little things they changed about Majora's Mask 3D that I hate. They had some good quality of life changes, yes. But in the end, it wasn't the game that I loved. It felt like it was kind of sanitized, kind of hollowed out a bit, it toned down. It's still Majora's Mask that's portable. It's still a B tier game. Like, I'm not even putting it A tier because, like, maybe I should. Maybe it doesn't hamper that much. But when there's several other ways I can easily play Majora's Mask at this point, I'm never going to replay this version.